most people are satisfied with being good. You can also choose to be excellent, or you can choose to be elite. But if you choose to be excellent or elite in something, you have to have a different and special discipline and focus and drive and commitment to do things to a very high standard all of the time.
Tell me about the 5 obsessions framework.
5 obsessions are based off of 5 principles. If you truly want to build something elite, I believe you need to have an obsession about these 5 principles. An obsession around filling your organization with great people. Second obsession.
Michael Erath, let me see if I've got this right. You jump into your family business that's at 8 million in revenue. You grow it to 45 million across 6 different continents. The '08 recession hits along with some crazy fraud. Company collapses. You find yourself obsessed, it's seemingly obsessed, digging into business operations. You get certified as an EOS implementer and a scaling up coach. And then you build your own framework with your new business, your current business, next level growth. Is this somewhat accurate so far?
Yeah, that is. There's one thing, one key piece missing is after the collapse of the $45 million business, when I first discovered EOS, and I had been doing bits and pieces of different tools from different things I had read and studied in the past, but I did start another business out of the ashes of that family business collapse. That business we grew from basically from 0 to 7 million over about 4 years. And I did that by self-implementing EOS. And that was kind of my first really dive into the systemization of business and how really building better systems leads to better results. But I did it in a way that was a very hybrid approach. And so I wasn't doing EOS purely where I felt like there were different tools that for me were a better fit. I was swapping things out and customizing it. And that's what kind of really helped put me on a trajectory to get on the path of coaching through EOS, scaling up, and then eventually deciding to blow that up and focus on building my own framework.
I love it. Okay, so I have 1,000 questions about that
Sure.
that we'll get to. And for anybody that doesn't know, EOS is the entrepreneur operating system. Scaling up, these are 2 different frameworks that people can run their business by. Many entrepreneurs today, even those that are printing money, are overwhelmed. If you had 30 seconds to give advice to the entrepreneurs that are growing, but are in the chaos of growth, what would it be?
Really zoom out and think about life as a whole and what you want out of life. And I try to frame it as what would it look like to earn a meaningful return on life, not just a return on investment. And get clear on that and then use your business as a vehicle and a tool to both create financial freedom, but at the same time to make sure it's serving that bigger vision you have for a return on life.
But how do you keep up with the Joneses if you do that?
Right. Fuck. Sorry.
We like the word "fuck" on this show.
Yeah, fuck the Joneses. Let them be stressed out and miss all the family stuff and grow up and regret, that their kids don't really know them and, all that stuff.
I love it. What to date? So you've been through a bunch of different business journeys at this point. What is the best investment that you've made in yourself, personally and professionally?
Honestly, it's been in finding my own coaches and mentors in areas where I need to be more proficient in things that I just don't have the background and skill sets for. I work with a public speaking coach because that's not a skill set. When I first started coaching, I worked with a business psychologist as a facilitation coach to help me learn techniques and things to do to help me be a better facilitator. And I think as entrepreneurs, it's interesting, if you enjoy playing golf and you want to get better, you don't think twice about hiring a pro and taking lessons and getting help. And I think a lot of things in our lives, if we want to get better, it's very natural to engage somebody to help us. But in the entrepreneurial side of things, we often feel like that's a sign of weakness and we resist seeking outside help and seeking help from others. And I think that's something that mentally is important to try to get beyond because everybody has their own, as Dan Sullivan calls it, unique abilities or their own zones of genius. And it's actually a little bit foolish to think we can be, in all of those at once, in all those zones of genius.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I very much internally tell myself that all makes sense. And then I get to the plate and somebody quotes me twice or three times or four times what I would expect for
Mhm.
coaching in a given area. How do you think about the dollars associated to something like a performance coach or somebody to guide you through the process?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and so it's interesting. So my company is called Next Level Growth, and we have a policy that all of our partners and business guides offer what we call a 10x guarantee when we start with a client. So we basically have two stages to how we work with clients. The first we call base camp, the second's the climb, and we use a lot of analogies around mountain climbing that growing a business is like climbing a mountain. So in base camp, and each of our partners have their own fee structure as far as what they charge, because we're basically, our calendars are inventory. So the 10x guarantee, we don't get paid anything until after the work is done with the client, and only if they can see a path to at least a 10x return on what they spent to work with us. If they don't see that at the end of the first day, they can keep the check, we can end the engagement and stop right there. So we end up, because of exactly what you described, we take all of the risk, and we also don't do contracts with clients. We had one client that recently left because they thought they needed something a little bit different that was deeper in the business. And so they signed on with a different coaching group, but they had to enter a 12-month contract. About 3 months in, they realized that wasn't exactly what they thought it was going to be, but they can't get out of the contract for another 9 months. Mm-hmm. And then I think, in a case like what you described, like I think if you're looking at possible coaching, ask them what the guarantee is, talk to references, see if they have any data, any case studies on results people get. What are they willing to guarantee? And are they willing to do it outside of a contract so that if you're not getting value, you can quit?
Yeah, I mean, I think best case scenario, that's true. I think pragmatically, there are a lot of situations where you've got the risk reward question, mm-hmm. which is you don't know, right? And so you can say guaranteed, right? But you don't know what the outcome is going to be. Right. And some of that's based on you as an individual and your performance, and can you hold yourself accountable? And some of it's based on the coaching, guidance, interaction, et cetera. That's always a question that you have to ask yourself. And in some situations, that's very clear. And in others, it's not so clear. Let's look at groups. Let's say that you're a part of YPO, right?
Yes.
So something like YPO, mm-hmm. there's no guarantee, right? There's no like money back exchange of I'm going to be in YPO and my business is going to get X amount bigger or better, or my life's going to get better. So when you think about that, do you have a dollar amount or threshold or some sort of mechanical reference point people can use for it's worth investing at this level?
I personally don't look at that with YPO, for example. I don't look at it as trying to prove myself a dollar for dollar ROI. What it really is becomes about being part of that network. Like I'm also a member of Genius Network. It's $35,000 a year to get in the room.
Is it now?
It is, yeah.
When did Joe bump it up? Joe was the good old 25K guy forever.
Joe, yeah, it went from 25 to 35 literally about 3 months before I decided to join.
Awesome.
But, it's one of those things where, so I'm in my second year now with Genius Network as well. And that's something I look at, that I'm willing to take the risk on the front end to be in the room, to build the relationships and get connected with the people that are part of that group. And then at the end of the year, I just kind of evaluate, do I feel like I got enough value out of this to keep going? And in my case, absolutely. And so, I think a lot of it comes back to what are the terms of how we work together? And if it is, if you are prepaying for a year of something, which you do with YPO, you do that with EO, you do that with Vistage, I believe, and groups like Genius. Okay, am I willing to make that investment? And am I willing, I think the more important key, and you hit on this, am I willing to do the work necessary to extract the value that I believe to be in that group or with that coach or whatever the case may be? Because you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, effort's your responsibility. It's not on the coach, right? You go take golf lessons, but if you don't go to the practice range and practice, it's not going to help.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the few absolute truths is certainly for entrepreneurs, but I think everybody is you have to take ownership of your own outcomes.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and you
There's
always have some influence on it.
exactly.
Not full control, but some influence on it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And that's actually a quote. There's a fitness group out here. I think it's called Mountainside Fitness where I saw this, but that's the big sign they've got on the wall. It just says effort is your responsibility. Right. So we've put that in all of our meeting rooms now because it's 100% true.
I love that. Sorry, I had to double click on that because I think about this stuff all the time. Like I just ran into a sort of I'm going to call him a health coach, but kind of like a quarterback for health, and like somebody that just runs point on, everything from stem cells to diet to everything, all your nutritional things, medical things. But he's 60 grand a year, maybe. And so I'm thinking about it. I'm like, that seems expensive. And I don't know why that seems expensive to me. And it's because I have no anchor for it. Right.
Right.
And so I'm trying to find other people that have some semblance of a framework to say it's okay to spend $5,000 a month on a health coach, or that thing is worth 10 grand a month, or that thing's worth $2,000 a month. Because I think as entrepreneurs, we're good at rationalizing lots of things. So these frameworks that show you a path are very helpful.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because they give you
thanks for no framework for health.
Right. Yeah.
But yes. Okay. So the guarantee on the front end with some coaching is some way you look at that. And then others, it's just a risk reward, deal with it and assess it later.
How many references do they have? Are you able to talk to references? I think that's worth doing because again, it's you need to do a little bit of kind of your own business intelligence before you run down one of these paths. And then, we, for example, one of the things that I think is very important that a lot of our prospects and clients focus on is long-term, whether they have, a specific plan for liquidity event or exit, or, they just want to really get the business in a stronger position to hand it off to the next generation. They're always looking at what's kind of the estimated enterprise value of my business. And so we did a case study of the first case study we did was 20 clients that had been with us for 5 consecutive years. And we looked at from the time we started until where they were after 5 years, we looked at lots of different financial data, and they basically on average across 9 different industries, 20 companies, they were doubling revenue every 3.5 years, but doubling dollars of profit every 2.5 years. And estimated enterprise value based on common market multiples, on average, those companies grew their enterprise value 5.9 times over the 5 years. So that starts to give you something where you can look at your current estimated value and start to extrapolate. If I perform at the average level of the clients in this study, then this is where I could expect to be. Again, you've got to do the work. But it's another way we've tried to create some data to help people wrap their minds around. Because I think going in any of these investments, it's even like investing in people. Like what's the marginal value gained relative to the marginal cost? And as long as that equation's in your favor as the buyer, it's essentially free. I mean, I like to say A players are free and they come with interest-free financing, which kind of gets into some of what we teach. But if you think about in an organization, anytime you upgrade from a mediocre performer to a true A player, the marginal value is so much greater than the marginal cost you had to spend to upgrade to an A player that they're free. And if you pay them over 24 pay periods at 0% interest, you're financing the investment, but you're getting a lot of the value in the first 1 or 2 quarters.
See, there we go. That is a good framework. So I think that most of the time, first of all, 2% of entrepreneurs think about the enterprise value of their company, because 2% of the entrepreneurs are actually thinking about the exit and structuring things for the exit or sale.
Right.
So I think that in general, that's a really good takeaway and good thing for people to think about. And then the other is the reality that these aren't expenses, they're investments, and the rate of investment can be pretty dramatic if it is the right investment. Well, let's back out here. So the starting point of your global in my head is jumping into your company's family when it's a company family business, when it's at 8 million and growing it to 45 million global enterprise. Tell me how you got to the point of jumping in, what experience you had to jump in and take over the business, and what you did to grow it.
Yeah, so I started, gosh, I mean, in high school and college, working summer breaks and spring breaks and things like that, just working in the business. My wife and I started dating at 15, so I needed money for my girlfriend. So I needed a job, and so I worked in the business, but really enjoyed it. And there was in all honesty, and I think I mentioned this in my first book, but there was a point in time in college, I was really fascinated by anatomy and physiology and thought about possibly going into medicine and possibly being an orthopedic surgeon or something like that. But in all honesty, when I looked at the path it would take to do that versus I can go party and have fun in college and go into the family business, that was really the easier, more logical route. But I mentioned my wife earlier. We got married at 22, right out of college, and we had a management change at our manufacturing facility in Virginia. We lived in North Carolina at the time, which is where our sales offices were. We manufactured hardwood veneer, and so we decided we didn't have kids yet. We moved to Virginia, and I got involved in the manufacturing part of the business, which I fell in love with. But by that time it was the late 90s. And that was a time where a lot of the furniture manufacturers were moving offshore. So when I first started, most of our customers were big furniture manufacturers, and they were in North Carolina and Virginia. So we were right in their back door. When they started all moving to Asia, we had to reinvent ourselves and become more of an export business versus a purely domestic business. And so that started the process. And then one of the things that I started to realize, sourcing the raw material was a big challenge for us. So I wanted to vertically integrate the business and get closer to the raw material so we had more control over that. And that's when I brought on this business partner who had a background in timber merchandising. And so part of that vertical integration, we set up a subsidiary company that he was the managing director of. And we began buying standing timber, managing all of that. And as we would harvest timber, he would merchandise through the company he was running all of the logs that we did not want to produce into veneer. And then we would keep the best logs to produce for ourselves. So that's kind of the vertical integration that led us into lots of export markets. Yeah.
So you went from manufacturing, were you manufacturing the basics of furniture at that point and selling them to furniture companies?
No, thank you. So in hardwood, in furniture that's finished with hardwood veneer, the veneer that we would produce is the higher end face grade veneer that goes on the surface. It would be laminated to plywood or other oriented strand board or other substrates. And then that would be used. So imagine like if you go into your kitchen and you look at the end panels on your kitchen cabinets, those are likely panels that are covered in veneer, and inside those panels is plywood. So we took hardwood logs, and our manufacturing process actually sliced the sheets of veneer. And so we were slicing sheets anywhere from 1/50th to 1/42nd of an inch thick. Then we were selling that product to companies that would then use that to make furniture, to finish the surfaces of their furniture.
Crazy. Okay. So you're slicing logs into tiny pieces, right, selling them to people that are manufacturing furniture.
Correct.
Right. And then you decided that you wanted to vertically integrate to go get the trees and cut the trees down and get the logs.
Right. To give us more control over our raw material inputs.
Okay. So this is, vertical integration, super common amongst businesses, specifically manufacturing, but tons of businesses. Also, somewhat crazy because I imagine you had not been chopping down trees in your past so far.
Right. And that was an area that was not an expertise of ours, which is why I brought on a partner who had expertise there, who ended up being the partner that I became best friends with, that ended up embezzling over $500,000, that ended up committing bank fraud. And both businesses were working with the same lender. So when we discovered his fraud and embezzlement and went to the U.S. Attorney's Office and to the bank with that information, the bank immediately froze all accounts in both companies because they needed to protect themselves and figure out what the heck was going on. And that started to lead us down that whole path, this was in November of 2008. So for those of you who remember the that housing market collapse. It was kind of the summer of '08 was when the first pains of that started to hit. And so we were going through this right as it was starting to really, really unravel.
Wow. So I want to ask some questions about that situation. But first, why don't you tell me kind of where that led? So the '08 housing collapse was the underpinning of that collapse was a super messy financial market, right? So all the banks are in dire straits. Some got bailed out, many collapsed. So for this to happen as that's happening would explain the banks being freaked out and not
Sure.
being very compassionate
Right.
or having options for that matter.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because the way I got through that was pretty fascinating. And this is what I wrote about in my first book, Rise, that came out in 2017. But when we discovered all of this on the manufacturing side of the business that I was running, about a year and a half prior, we had taken out a $6 million term note with the same lender to add some new equipment, expand the factory, because in '06, '07, the economy was cranking. Things were great. And so we were building to increase our capacity. The dynamics of all of this, my father had passed. He passed in 2003. My mother she was part of the company when we took out the term note. But between that time and when this collapse happened, we had transacted her out of the business as part of our estate planning. So when this happened, she was hung on the guarantee of the term note, but no longer had equity in the company that she was stuck on the note for. So my mother, father's passed, my wife and I and my mother are on this guarantee, and we find out that my business partner has been committing bank fraud. So I had to figure out, number one, how to try to avoid bankruptcy because I didn't want them going after my mother. I didn't want to put her in that position. And I, of course, didn't want my wife and I having to deal with that. So because of the chaos the banks were dealing with, I went to the special assets group, and with all the brand new equipment we had bought, if they had forced bankruptcy and auctioned us off, they would have gotten nothing, literally nothing, because our industry was so small, the equipment was so expensive. So I offered if they would give me just enough liquidity to keep the doors open, I would stay on board and unwind the business over time for their benefit. And while I couldn't guarantee what we could do with that, it would definitely be better than bankruptcy. And I think because of the chaos they were dealing with at the time, we were viewed as one less fire to fight. So they allowed us to kick the can down the road. And it took about 18 months, and I had some incredibly fortunate breaks. I had luck on my side for a little while and was able to get the bank and the creditors made whole. My wife and I took the haircut. But I spent 18 months meeting twice a month with the special assets group of SunTrust Bank, which is now part of Truist. And that was an amazing, it was a painful lesson dealing with special assets, but it was an incredible lesson in terms of what I learned and went through that.
You know, I would say like one of the immediate lessons that's relevant for entrepreneurs is there's always a negotiation to be had. And
Yes.
sometimes people think that, you know, a huge corporate bank, you can't talk to them, you can't negotiate. But the fact is in life, there is a human at the other end of everything. And
Right.
so there's a win-lose for everybody. And so the question is, what's the lever? And you have a negotiation to have.
Yeah, lever's the right word, right? I like to say leverage is a great thing to have and not need to use. You know, and so I was in a situation where we didn't have much leverage, but what I was able to find was kind of that one lever that we owed the bank enough money that if they wrote basically the whole thing off, it was going to hurt. And because of the amount of chaos they had going on, my leverage was if I can remove from them one more fire to have to deal with, then that may give me a pathway. And at the same time, because this guy was my business partner, you know, the first 24 hours, everybody thinks, okay, everybody that's involved is in trouble here. And so through the efforts we made, and like one of the very first things we did is we hired a gentleman who was a former FBI forensic accountant. He spent 20 years in the Bureau and was now doing private forensic accounting investigations. He came on board and spent 3 days working with my CFO. So the day that we did go to the bank and the special assets group, I had a retired FBI forensic accountant on my side. We had our legal team there, and we were very quickly able to make it clear and get the bank and the U.S. Attorney's Office on board that I had also been duped and defrauded in all of this. And so they quickly got to a point where they realized that I was on the right side of this. I was working to try to help them, cooperating in all the investigation and helping the bank try to recover as much as they could. And so I think it's one, what are your points of leverage, but also, really trying to do the right things for the right reasons and trust that in time, while that may be difficult in the short term, it does often work in the long term.
Yeah, I love that. I think that my personal experience has been that when you focus on the return on relationship, even when it's in a very difficult situation and it looks like you're going to lose your ass as a result, focusing on the relationship as opposed to the finances often yield a better result.
Yeah, it's a great point, right? You said it earlier. There's a human on every side of every transaction, and we are emotional creatures. We're relational creatures, and there's something powerful at play there.
Yep. And sometimes the benefit happens in the short run, and sometimes it's a very long horizon.
Right.
When you play the return on relationship game, but for most of us, life is long, and there are a lot of cycles of life, a lot of lessons to learn, a lot of chapters, and people show up again.
Right. Yeah. And to your point, where that left us was when we started the new business in the wake of all of this, we were able to maintain our home. So we sold our home. We moved to Ohio because there was a contract manufacturer. So we started to outsource our production. But we were able to save our home and move into an apartment and take that equity and use that to restart a business. Also, because we had avoided bankruptcy, my credit had not been affected. So we were able to get a small business loan. We got a $100,000 line of credit, and we're able to restart. We were able to pull together enough capital to start a new business.
That's big. Well, speaking of return on relationships, the other side of this is you have who was your best friend, business partner, committed fraud.
Yeah.
And this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is fraud that put him in jail?
Took 4 years for him to finally be prosecuted, but the wheels of justice grind slowly, but they grind very fine. And so he did spend 2 years of a 2.5-year sentence in federal prison as a result.
Yeah, I wanted to put a point on that because people throw terms like fraud around, and there's a difference between, some sloppy bookkeeping and even malicious intent and prosecution and landing in federal prison as a result of your actions.
Right. Exactly.
So what lesson did you learn from that experience in picking that business partner and doing business with somebody that ultimately yielded that result?
So he and I became friends very quickly. He was a few years younger than me, really gregarious, fun guy. And so one of the things that was a weakness and a blind spot for me at the time was things that, in terms of how I structured the reporting relationships and the leadership of the business, what was logical and what I should have done versus what I did as a result of our friendship and me overly trusting him. For example, because we had two separate operating entities in the manufacturing business, the family business that I was running, we had a CFO. In the business that he was running, we had a controller, but at his request, I had the controller directly reporting to him as the managing director, not reporting to my corporate CFO. And so it started to create a little bit of a curtain between the companies. And one of the things that was uncovered in the investigation, so he was what initially got him caught was he was signing falsified borrowing-based certificates to a federally chartered bank. So that was the fraud that they eventually got him on. But prior to that, the controller was signing those. And in the investigation, we realized they had two sets of financial statements, and every month they would play games with the numbers to determine what they would send me versus what was actual. So as part of that investigation, right, if the controller had been reporting to my CFO, I think we would have had a check and balance in place that would have made this very difficult to pull off, if not impossible. And one of the things that came out in the investigation, it was alleged, and there were witnesses alluded to this, that the two of them were having an affair. Because why would the controller do something she knew was fraudulent and a felony for his benefit when there was no financial interest or no gain for her?
Mm.
And so, I mean, it was bizarre the way all the pieces started to kind of come together when, in hindsight, we were able to look through the investigation and unravel all of this.
Do you remember what the FBI forensic accountant cost you?
I don't, and it was immaterial at the time because this guy was so good. And because of his FBI background, he had deep relationships with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And back to your relationships, right? I mean, as part of our legal team, my corporate attorney advised me to pay for and add to the legal team a criminal defense attorney because the criminal defense attorney also had a relationship with the U.S. Attorney's Office. But also he would be able to guide and predict what my business partner and his legal team were doing in terms of how they were trying to position things. So I know it was, in all, I'm sure it was well over $100,000 in the grand scheme of things. But I had a corporate attorney who was also a friend. I had a criminal defense attorney. I had an FBI forensic accountant, a retired FBI forensic accountant, as part of our legal team, guiding my CFO and I. And to me, it was like, I had no idea how to navigate this. I had never been through something like this before. I was terrified as to where it was going to go and what was going to happen. And those were the right people to invest in having around me.
Yeah, that makes total sense. You're also at this point at roughly 45 million a year in revenue. What's margin like on a company like that?
So we were in that business. It's very much a high volume, low margin business. So if we were operating on 3 to 5% at the end of the year, net operating income, that was not a bad year. Which really meant you didn't have a lot of room. You catch a cold and you're losing money fast.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you're looking at 3 to 5%, you have to have things running very well.
Right.
Yeah, I like businesses where if I fuck up too much, there's still margin.
Right, exactly.
Insert funny advertisement here. Or just check out Easy Pay Direct. It's epd.com/BAM, and you can find out about credit card processing for your business. Lots of our guests use us for credit card processing. And this seemed like more fun than writing a scripted ad. Okay, so this company collapses. You move to Ohio, apartment. You have some equity. You take out a line for $100,000, and this is where you start the next business that you get to $7 million in 4 years.
Right.
What's that business, and where did EOS fit in this process, if it did at this point?
So it was the same industry. Manufacturing veneer. We didn't do a lot of timber trading. We weren't buying timber. We didn't have the resources for that anymore. But there was a contract manufacturer outside of Columbus, Ohio. And so I kept one log buyer on the procurement team. I kept one salesperson and my wife and I, and basically kind of bootstrapped from there. And so we would buy logs. We would have the production of the veneer outsourced. So we were only paying a unit cost for that. And then we had a small warehouse and we're selling product. I had done some things when I was in YPO in the family business. We had been through Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, which was kind of the precursor to scaling up. I had done top grading. I had implemented that in our business. So I'd done bits and pieces of different things that were components of, but not a holistic operating system. And at that time, I didn't qualify for YPO anymore. So I transitioned to EO. In the form that I was in, we read the book Traction together, which is the book that really explains EOS. And I felt like it was something I could understand and I could customize, but I liked the holistic approach and it was pretty simple. So I decided to self-implement that. And that's where, as I was going through the self-implementation, there were, for example, there were people tools from Top Grading that I felt like were much better than the tools EOS offered to help you get people right. So the concept I loved, but I decided to swap out some of the tools because for me, it was a better fit. And so what ended up happening is as we were scaling from 0 to 7 million, and that was when we made the Inc. 5000, when I made it for the first time, I was just building this kind of customized, built for me version of EOS versus taking the prescriptive route and just doing exactly what pure EOS would be. So by 2015, I was just at a point where I was really getting burned out on the industry that I was in after everything I had kind of endured through that. And it was still a very low margin business, even outsourcing the production the way we did. And I just wanted to get out of that space. One of my EO colleagues had a furniture business that happened to be in Columbus as well. He was trying to self-implement EOS, but was just all over the place as a visionary and couldn't really get it done. So he asked me, since he had seen me doing it well, could I help his team? And so I just kind of offered to start working with his team a little bit, and fell in love with taking everything I had learned up to that point and being able to be on the other side and teach and coach and facilitate. So that's when I decided, you know what, I'm going to exit this business. So I exited that company in Ohio and started initially working as an EOS implementer, and was very successful in that, in large part because of my background. People wanted to work with me specifically because of what I had been through. And in I think it was 2019, I'm sorry, a little bit earlier that, Gino Wickman, the founder of EOS and the author of Traction, sold to a private equity company. And as often happens, things change when private equity gets involved. And so a few years later, I think it was 2020, EOS transitioned from a license agreement with the implementers, which allowed me to paint outside the box and teach other things if I wanted to. They didn't like it, but they couldn't control it. They transitioned to a franchise model, and the franchise agreements precluded any of that. And so it would have significantly devalued me because a lot of what I was doing to help companies go beyond just EOS, I would have had to stop. So that's when I decided I'm out. We're not values aligned anymore. And that's what was originally the birthing of Next Level Growth and these 5 obsessions of elite organizations.
Awesome. Well, I want to dive into that, but before I do, as a human, going from 45 million in revenue, being a part of YPO, to going through near bankruptcy, starting over, functionally being kicked out of YPO, right? Not qualifying anymore.
Right.
You go into a group down is the perception in that hierarchy. Emotionally, as a person, how are you going through that? And what's your mindset in that situation? And how are you tackling, hey, I'm going to start a new business?
So I think the first several months when things started to unravel with the family business, it was just shock and just trying to find some equilibrium, because everything was just upside down. But I got pretty clear early on, and my wife and I were very aligned on this, that we took the approach that we needed to live to fight another day. And that really got us through those early days. And it was interesting. The conversation I had when we moved to Ohio, I was talking to a couple of the YPO board members in the chapter there. And there was a grace period by which I could have requalified. And at this time, I'm really focused on this, this small business that I'm starting, outsourcing. But I was pretty confident I would get to the revenue number I needed to requalify. But the other side of that equation was a minimum of 50 employees. And with the new business model and outsourcing our production, I had no interest or no desire to get back to 50 or more employees. It wasn't necessary for the business. And so that was the reason that I wasn't going to qualify. And so that made it a little bit easier to transition out. And the Columbus chapter of EO is a fantastic chapter. It's a very strong chapter. And so I was able to get into a really good form group and made that transition. And there were parts of it where, it felt like, I've got my tail tucked a little bit after everything I've been through. But what I started to find was the more I shared my story, and this is why I ended up writing my first book, which was all about this. The more I shared my story with entrepreneurs, the more people said, man, I've never told anybody about it, or I don't talk about it, but I had a similar thing happen. Here's my story. And it literally is like 4 out of 5 entrepreneurs I talk to, if they've been doing it for more than 10 or 15 years, like they have similar stories, maybe different scale and things like that. And I started to realize that there was actually a lot of power in being vulnerable and open about what I went through and sharing those details. And that actually gave me, I think, a lot of momentum and positivity, because I realized it felt like a weakness to me, but in reality, it wasn't perceived as that by others. That was just my own negative self-talk. And so the more I could embrace that and communicate what I've learned from it and how it's helped me grow, the more it actually became a strength in the long run.
Yeah, what a good lesson, man. Look, I don't think it is true that we have no idea what's going on in other people's lives.
Right.
And most of the world doesn't put their heart on their sleeve or, turn all their baggage inside out. But you better believe we've all gone through our own issues.
Right.
That's great. So let's dig into the EOS stuff. You went through and are a certified EOS implementer and a scaling up coach. You articulated before that you did some alternate version of EOS the first time you went into it and started using it. I think that basically every single company I know that runs on a framework does some perverted version of EOS. It doesn't follow it to the letter. What are the fundamental flaws in EOS and scaling up?
I think what this really boils down to is it's a fundamental flaw with anything that is a highly prescriptive system. So if you think about a lot of business coaches, they're tied to a specific system or product. And so that's kind of the thing they've got to sell. And when you leverage a prescriptive system, by default, primacy is always put on the system and trying to force fit you into that system and into that mold. And that's what we started to realize is if we want to flip that on its head and we want to put primacy on the user and on outcomes and on the goals they want, and we want the system to be a secondary byproduct, we've got to think more in terms of principles and less in terms of, I need to come to you with a system. I need to give you, here's 20 tools I've got, right? And you got to use these tools because these are the tools that are going to help you. It's really about backing up and looking at a principled framework. And so these 5 obsessions are based off of 5 principles that if you truly want to build something elite, I believe you need to have an obsession about these 5 principles. And if you do that, it doesn't really matter what tools you use to be excellent in these 5 areas. It doesn't matter what systems they come from. It doesn't matter if you created it yourself, if you borrowed it from somebody else, or that's irrelevant. It's about executing that principle to a high standard. And so we've curated over 100 different tools. I think there's 20 in the EOS toolbox, but there's so many different things in the public space that can be helpful and valuable. And so many thought leaders have written so many great things. We really focus on how to take a lot of these concepts and find ways to operationalize them in a way that's custom fitted to the individual company, the culture of that company, the industry that they're in. And that creates something that will scale with an organization as it grows, because there's not just one tool or one way to do things.
Okay, so let's talk about the 5 obsessions framework. So this is your framework, which, by the way, it takes some gall to say, hey, I'm going to create a better framework than the other people that businesses should follow. Now, what you just said, I think, is an interesting way that I would internalize and rationalize it, because what I think you just said is, I don't have the prescription for you. What I have are the fundamentals that I think will help you build your business. Okay, so I think that's a very interesting difference between, hey, I have a better system to run versus I have a better approach to take to run a business. Tell me about the 5 obsessions framework.
Yeah. So again, if you don't focus on the tools and the system by which you get there, I think, and again, the other differentiator, and I just want to share this really quickly. There's a really good video. It's on our YouTube channel. It's less than a minute, but it's Nick Saban talking about what he calls 5 choices. And he talks about this idea that we all have 5 choices in life. And what he says, and this is what really helped lead me to this elite organizations idea. He said, we can choose to be bad at what we do. And unfortunately, some people, I think, do that. We can choose to be average. We can choose to be good. And most people are satisfied with being good. But he said, you can also choose to be excellent, or you can choose to be elite. But if you choose to be excellent or elite in something, you have to have a different and special discipline and focus and drive and commitment to do things to a very high standard all of the time. And if you don't have that, you probably never get past good. And so when I started to look at, even when I was working as an EOS implementer, there were people who literally would want to hire me to help them with EOS. And their reason, when I asked them why, was, well, my form's doing it and it feels like something I need to do too. Like, that's not a very good reason. You're not going to do the work. You're not going to push that hard if you're doing it because everybody else is. So if you really want to be elite, I think you have to have an obsession around filling your organization with great people. Jim Collins writes a lot about this conceptually, but good to great doesn't give you a path to actually go do it. And so what we've tried to do is we've tried to fit together lots of different ways that you can consistently over time recruit, hire, retain, develop people into A players and have systems that coach people up or coach people out, both culturally around your culture, your purpose, your values, and also performance within their roles. So really figuring out how to systemize a way to obsess about filling the organization with great people. But then secondly, the second obsession is what we call an inspiring purpose. And it's not only about the external marketing, but it's also about internally marketing. So if, for example, Brad, if you came to work for our organization and you were a great alignment with our core values for the role you were hired into, you had the skill sets to perform to a high level, if we can communicate to you an inspiring purpose that you can form a personal, emotional connection to around the work that we do and why we do it, you will always bring more energy and passion and creativity to your work because of that emotional connection. And I think that's an area as leaders we often miss, is really internally marketing to our team, our messaging, and who we're serving and why we're serving and what we do. And even in heavily commoditized businesses, I still find that oftentimes we are able to get to a true inspiring purpose. Sometimes it's just more internally focused than externally. So really working through and solving for that. And then the third is optimized playbooks. So if we have great people, they're driven and motivated around an inspiring purpose, and we give them optimized playbooks, that really helps them with the systemization of how we do things. It helps free up their creativity because we've standardized all of the normal, predictable things within the business. Think about any professional sports team. All right, nobody would go on the field without having playbooks that they've studied and knowing who's responsible for and doing what when we run plays. The fourth is a culture of performance. And this goes back to that idea of, I think we have to have clear expectations with people. We have to have the right data, and people need to know, are they winning in their role? Is their team winning based on what the mission is and what we're trying to accomplish as a team? Do we know the score? Do we have all of that? And when we're not winning and when we are missing or underperforming in certain areas, having a system that fits our culture, that's aligned with our values, that exists to support and coach up people who are coachable, but to coach out people who aren't, which then helps reinforce the great people obsession. And then the fifth and final is growing profits and cash flow. And it drives me absolutely crazy. I hear people so many times saying that, profit and cash is a byproduct of doing everything else right. And personally, I think it's bullshit. Because if you treat profit and cash like a byproduct, it always will be. And if you're not intentional about understanding your pricing strategy and being intelligent about it and looking at cash conversion cycles and how you leverage capital, if you're not really focused on the financial strength and health of the business and improving that over time, that's the fuel that goes back into fulfilling your purpose. So if you really believe in your purpose, you need to be very focused on growing profits and cash flow, because that's what allows you to do more of your purpose and expand on that. So
yeah, I got people, purpose, playbooks, performance, profit.
Yes.
We've got the 5 Ps.
Right.
Like
those 5 areas, right?
I like it. So I mean, I just had a conversation about this, but profit, I very deeply resonate with that element. And I talk to our team internally at Easy Pay Direct and also in other companies that I participate in about executing the client experience. And part of executing the client experience for us is our clients generating revenue. So we're doing, credit card processing for thousands of businesses. And if they don't ever use our product, meaning we don't get them effectively through the client experience, they don't have a good experience and we don't make any money. And if we don't make any money, the company can't take care of the team and it ceases to have a purpose, right? You need that profitability to work to do that.
Right.
But you also said in that section of these 5 Ps, it's growth of profit and cash flow, and the focus on that whole thing as its own element. At what stage in business should you be heavily focused on your pricing strategy and optimizing pricing versus some of the other Ps where you're just fucking focused on growing?
So I think, in the very early stages, you've really got to be focused on, is this something that I can grow, right? Does the market really want this? And so, there's that kind of startup to, $1 million or so, where it's really a lot about proof of concept. And you've got to prove that you have something that can scale. But then I do think as you start to get beyond that point in the 1 to 5, 5 to 10 and beyond, you have to periodically be coming back to really looking at that. I mean, it's interesting. I've got companies I've worked with that are, $50 to $100 million, and I'll ask if they can, help me understand your pricing strategy. And they look at me like I'm asking them a quantum physics question, right? And it's like, well, so how do you determine your prices? And it ends up, there's not a lot of strategy behind how they do that. And you've got salespeople who are quick to offer discounts. And one of the things that I have in the book is there's a table that shows you, based on your gross margin, how much, if you raise prices by various percentages, how much volume you could afford to lose and still generate the same dollars of gross profit, which is what you're covering your expenses with. But then it also shows you, and it's actually surprising, most people will never lose the volume that they would have to not be able to raise a price. Conversely, it shows, based on your gross margins, if you offer a 5%, 10%, 20% discount, how much you would have to grow your volume for that discount in order to generate the same gross profit dollars. And there's some wild numbers in there. I think, for example, if you're I think it's like at a 50% gross margin, if you offer a 10% discount, you have to grow your sales like 20% to not cannibalize and lose gross profit dollars. And so those are some things that people just don't often think about. And so the decisions are not really made through the right lenses when they go do these things.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's another really good takeaway for people, is to actually do the math on that stuff. Right. And you said, don't think about it. And yes, don't think about it. And even if it does cross your mind at some point, that I think, sadly, most people quickly form an opinion based on somebody else's narrative or feedback and don't bother to do the math internally themselves. Right. And I mean both literal math and also just the homework, research, study to come to their own conclusion.
Exactly.
That's great. So what tools and structures do you have inside of the framework that allow people to execute this?
So, we've got, when we work with clients, we have what we have found to be best practices within each of these areas. So, for example, I really liked the EOS concept of an accountability chart versus an org chart, because I believe that most of our frustrations with people are the result of unclear expectations. And so if we can, so job descriptions create clear expectations, but they're several pages long. Nobody ever remembers what all's in their job description, and they never look at it after the interview process. But at the same time, the EOS accountability chart, if you read the book Traction and you look at the examples, they say things like a director of operations, one of their roles is make the product or deliver the service. It's such a vague statement that it's difficult to create accountability around that. So one of the things we tried to do is say, okay, how do we take the beauty of the accountability chart is that it's not overly complicated and it creates more clarity around who's accountable for what and how we hold people accountable. So we decided a way we could evolve that is to have 3 components of an accountability chart sheet. So take the same director of operations. We establish what we call a mission, which is a one sentence, a one short sentence that describes the high level, consistent deliverable required to be successful in the role. So it's a descriptive, qualitative statement that we can begin to build a measurable around. And so every role in your company, I think you should be able to explain, if we're going to contribute salary dollars to go hire somebody to put them in this seat, what's the mission for that role, right? Let's get clear on that. Because then if we understand that, the second component is what we call a most critical outcome. And so the most critical outcome is a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator, that proves, number one, success in the mission, but number two, something else I think most entrepreneurs don't measure is return on investment for the person in the seat. So if we're going to pay somebody a certain salary, fully burdened, and we know what we're investing in that seat, what is the outcome that we can measure that, if achieved, would prove we're getting return on that investment? Because again, I think mathematically we need to understand, are we getting ROI on people? It's the biggest expense in most companies, right? Is our payroll fully burdened? So once we know the mission, most critical outcome, then we look at the 3 to 5 obsessions within that role. What are the buckets of responsibility they have to obsess about on a daily basis? So where EOS would say make the product, we might say for that director of operations, one of their obsessions would be to own the operations playbooks, execution, and outcomes. That's how we make the product, but that gives me something much more specific. So for example, if you came to work for our company and you were director of operations and that was one of your obsessions, I can now sit down and have an intelligent conversation with you about what the expectations are. Do we have all of our operations playbooks in place? Because you own them. So if not, you've got to get that done. Number two, are they being properly executed? So have you built out the training? Have you, and so it just starts to get us down into deeper, more acute areas we can have conversations to coach people up, coach people out, get the things in place that we need by adding that level of clear expectations. There's lots of examples in the book. So that's the idea of a framework, but then it gets very customized to the individual company, the individual roles.
Awesome. I couldn't agree more relative to expectation mismatches being the core of most discontent and conflict with humanity.
It's in our personal lives, professional lives. It's all the way around.
Yeah. So one of the things that I found interesting about the 5 obsessions of elite organizations is that you have an AI companion that goes along with it. Tell me about how that intersects. So 5 Obsessions of Elite Organizations is the book that you wrote about this structure that walks through these things. And then you rolled out an AI companion with it. Tell me how you came to that and what technology you used and how you see that fitting in with the book.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that up. So I got the idea, actually, this was one of those ideas that came out of Genius Networks. You start thinking about what's the ROI on my investment. I would have never known about this, or it would have taken a while had I not been in that group. But Joe Polish started building an AI clone using a platform called Delphi. And that's the platform that I used. And so I learned a fair amount from Joe about it. And then what I started to realize was with this book launching, what often happens, so you mentioned that a fair amount of your audience is still kind of in that proof of concept. They're in the early stages of a startup. A lot of people in that stage are voraciously reading books. They've got a high thirst for learning, and they're looking for things they can use in their business. So at that stage, you can buy the book and you can try to figure things out for yourself based on what you read in a book. Or on the other extreme, you can go hire someone who is a coach in whatever that thing is, or a guide in our case. But there's kind of nothing in the middle. And so the idea with the AI clone was if somebody either can't afford to work with one of our partners, but really likes the concepts and likes what we've created as a framework, or maybe they just don't want to, right? Some people just want to do it themselves, and that's perfectly fine. They could, for a very inexpensive price, I think it's $20 a month right now, they could subscribe to the clone and they could take what's in the book and they could communicate with the clone, which has been trained on everything I've ever written. All of the content we give to our clients is in the training for the clone. So if they have a role that they're trying to figure out, what's the right mission, what's the most critical outcome, I'm stuck, I can't figure it out, the clone will iterate with them and help them figure that out, and it will give them suggestions based on its knowledge base and learning.
I mean, we're still, it's end of July 2025 when we're recording this. AI is rapidly changing, getting significantly better every day, it seems. But we're all just figuring out kind of where it fits into business and where it fits into life. From a financial perspective for you so far, how is the implementation of the AI element impacting your business? Are you selling it effectively? Are a lot of people using it? What kind of feedback are you getting? I mean, I think that the bet is that it's going to be a good thing down the road, or it's going to be a good thing over the course of the next year, 2, 3, 5. How is it right now?
So what I'm finding is the adoption is very low initially. I think people just aren't used to this, right? It's just a new thing. I have had a handful of people that have gone pretty deep with it, and I'm able to see on the back end all of the conversations. So if there's a response that I want to update, I can update it. It notifies the user and it updates the learning. But it's been really good in terms of quality. But also it's something, from a marketing perspective, we've been more focused on the book launch. We've been more focused on, we're up to 10 partners and guides now, helping them get their calendars full. So it's not been something we've been promoting heavily. It's mentioned quite a bit throughout the book as an additional resource. But I think that's something that will be more moving into next year. We'll be promoting more heavily. And one thing and this is on Delphi's side, they're transitioning to a new studio. Currently, I cannot have both a subscription model and free accounts. The new studio will allow me to have a VIP level where all of the leadership team members of all of the companies I work with, I'll be able to give those leadership team members free access to the clone and still have a subscription for people who aren't actually clients. And the goal there is I think that will create, because these are people that are already going down our path and working with us, it will create a lot of engagement with the clone. And my hope is that then that'll help us get testimonials and some videos and things to begin marketing it a little bit more broadly.
Yeah, that makes sense. In your signature line of your emails, you say, if you're not changing it, you're choosing it, which I love. What's something that a lot of entrepreneurs seem discontent with that they're actually choosing?
The acceptance of mediocre performance. It's one of the most common things I see. And Dr. Jordan Peterson made a great statement. He was actually one of the speakers at the last annual Genius Network event. And at one point he was talking about his view towards his team and the people he surrounds himself with. And he just made this statement that really resonated. He said, enabling failure is not a noble cause. And I think as humans, we often are reluctant to have difficult conversations around performance when it's not meeting expectations, because those are not easy and comfortable conversations. And so we rather avoid them. And in essence, we tolerate the mediocrity. And sometimes we do it because we want to be nice or whatever the case may be. And it's just, you will never build anything elite if you don't have very high standards, very high expectations, and live up to them yourself, but also require those around you to live up to those same standards. And that's where it goes back to the coachability. I think if that's the kind of organization you want something truly elite that can become a category of one in its space, you have to be willing to coach people and invest time in supporting people who prove to be coachable, but you also have to have systemized within your business how you expunge people who prove to not be coachable, who won't take feedback, and who don't maybe have the aptitude to level up into what you need from them. And if you have too much of that, then you probably have a recruiting problem, and you need to fix your recruiting strategy and processes. And so, but yeah, I think the acceptance of mediocrity is a cancer in most entrepreneurial organizations that keeps them as organizations mediocre at best.
Yeah, I love that. Allowing people to be mediocre isn't being nice.
Right.
No. So avoiding that, said another way, avoiding the tough conversation isn't being nice to those people. It's facilitating their perpetuated mediocrity.
Right. Exactly.
What advice do you have for a 25-year-old entrepreneur starting out?
Try a lot of stuff. 25 years old, think about what really excites you and brings you energy that at the same time you're very good at. And if you can find a balance between something you're really good at that really brings you energy, if you are an entrepreneur, is there something that can be created within that the market will appreciate and that provides differentiated value? I think this balance between differentiated value and market appreciation is really important to think about, because a lot of people try to build something around a differentiated value, but the market just doesn't really appreciate it. And so they're passionate about it, they love it, but they haven't really proven that the market wants it. And so they end up on this hamster wheel. And so I think you've got to look at both and understand how to achieve something within the overlap of those two things.
Love it. Michael Erath. I got a lot of good stuff out of that. I think I kind of am always looking at the granularity of how to execute.
Yes.
And I think we clicked into a couple things in the framework and also lessons from the past that were certainly helpful for me and hopefully helpful for others. Appreciate the time. Where should people find you? Where do you want to point people?
So there's a couple of places. Nextlevelgrowth.com is the website. We've got a YouTube channel under the same name. There's lots of great stuff on the YouTube channel. You can reach out to me through the website. The clone is at askmichaelerath.com. And then the book 5 Obsessions, we've got a website, 5obsessions.com. You can link to the book there. It's on Amazon. It's on Audible as well.
Awesome. Michael, thanks so much for the time.
All right, Brad, enjoyed it. This was great.
Thanks for checking out this Beyond a Million episode. It occurred to me just now that I never tell people to leave comments, and that's probably really stupid. I should tell you to leave a comment. So if you have any questions, or you liked the show, or you hated the show, it would be awesome if you would leave a comment. It makes a big difference in helping other people find it. Leave a comment below.